Welcome to another Design Charrette about the Catherine and Isiah Leggett Science and Math Building. We're all very pleased to have you here this evening. I would be remiss if I didn't mention VIP in the room. Council member from Takoma Park, Peter Kovar, is here. Peter, are there any other VIPs that I should mention? Everyone. In fact, everyone is crucial to the success of this whole process. Remember, this is the website at the college where we have stored all of the documents that we have produced as a result of this process. So everything that we've gone through, slideshows, feedback sheets, etc., are all up on this document or on this website. They reside there forever, or at least as long as the college is here. So please make use of this as a resource. And with that, I would like to introduce my two partners in crime, so to speak, for the evening. Bob Bull from the Smith Group, who has exciting new design to share with all of you, and Michael Aiken, who is going to kick us off with the whole process. Michael, the mic's all yours.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The applause started with my team in the back. It's important when you pay people that they clap for you, so that was very helpful. Thank you all for braving the storm tonight, for coming out. Those are not ancient pictures of Bob and I. That's actually what we look like at the beginning of this process. No, it's been a phenomenal process, and I'm glad that we are back here with you. So the format tonight is going to look very similar to the 5 meetings we did the last time we were together. We're going to start with a large group format, then we're going to break into working groups, and then we're going to come back together. We got really good feedback on that format in the first go-round, so we believe in not changing something that's working. So that's what tonight's going to look like. I'm going to kick us off with a little overview of the process and how we got here, and then Bob's going to walk you through some pretty detailed designs about where we are in terms of the design of the building. Next slide. So welcome back. We're back at it, and we're going to be doing a lot of engagement from here on out. Here's a refresher for some folks who may be coming into this process at this stage. We started our last round of engagement with an ice cream social and then 5 Design Charrette meetings. They all followed a very similar format to tonight, where we would have a big kickoff, we would break into work groups, we'd come back and report out. I want to say really authentically that I have the pleasure of working on community engagement projects around the country, and I'm really proud of the way this one has gone so far, largely because of the level of commitment that everyone has shown. Most importantly, the stakeholders who've continued to come to these meetings. I also want to give a shout out to the architecture team, who I think did a really good job of providing kind of countless numbers of designs and views and architecture and planning diagrams to respond to community feedback. The community feedback itself has been very extensive. I'm sure everyone can read everything that's up on this screen right now, but this is over 500 collected comments. That's every idea, suggestion, question, concern that was raised through our Design Charrette process. Every single one of those items was captured, it was documented, and then it was responded to by the school/the project team. If you can't read this, it's posted in the hallway. It also lives online and will continue to remain online. It's one thing to kind of document something like this for full transparency. It's a whole other thing to then use this feedback in the process itself. And I can say with very high certainty that this feedback was used throughout the design process that got us here. You'll probably remember that we had a diagram when we kicked off our work the first time around that showed everything that we were going to do to get through the Design Charrette process. That did not start on 4, it started on number 1, so this is kind of where we are since the last time we came together. I think it's a really legitimate question why we haven't come back together in this type of format since late October, and so I wanted to spend some time talking about that. Our last 2 Design Charrette meetings were on October 2nd and October 16th. Since that time, the project went into a mandatory referral process. During that time, no changes are made to the project, etc. And that was all leading up to a planning board hearing on February 14th. Now, some of you were at the planning board hearing. Some of you know this process very well. But at that hearing, we got some feedback from the planning board on the project as a whole. After that, the feedback from the Design Charrettes that you were a part of and the feedback from the planning board all went into this next stage that we're in now, and that was informed by our contractor estimates on everything that we designed together. What was that actually going to cost to build? So you take the feedback from our process, you take the feedback from the planning board, and you take the feedback from the contractor who's estimating the cost, and you put that all together to enter the phase we're in now, which is looking at how do we align scope and the budget estimates with the design that you're going to see tonight. So that's where we are today. We're going to come back together on July 9th for our last and final Design Charrette. So tonight will be design meeting. We'll do one more on July 9th. After that, we will continue a whole nother round of forums where through the opening of the building and all the way through the construction phase, we will continue to have forums and community meetings. The formal design process will be done at that point, but we'll continue to come together to talk about everything through the construction stage. Does that make sense as a whole? Excellent. So with that, I'm going to turn over to Bob to go through all the important stuff. Bob?
Great. Thank you, Michael. So as Michael said, we spent a considerable amount of time working with the CM, the construction manager that Montgomery College hired, which is Barton Mallow. And through that process, what we did during the scope and budget alignment was took the current design the way we left it in October and validated it against current market conditions, current economic opportunities within the market, and found that we did have to make some significant reductions to the building size and program. Those manifested in two ways: one, a budget alignment of about $30 million, and a square footage reduction in the building of about 30,000 square feet. So it's a significant reduction in the program, but we were able to do it in such a way to make the building more efficient and still provide many of the programmatic elements and aspects that were originally part of the aspirations for the project initially. So we're able to really achieve what the college was seeking in the beginning, but at a much lower budget, and to the benefit at least of the community with a smaller building, a more efficient building. So we'll get into that tonight and show you exactly how that was reflected in the current design. So we'll start off with a recap of some of the things that we've been talking about at every meeting, and then get into some of the nitty-gritty and the details associated with the current design, the way it stands, and comparing it to where we left it off in October. So to refresh everybody's memory, when the design team was brought on board, we were given some pretty clear directives to follow, and we haven't forgotten about those, and we will just quickly summarize them here for you all tonight. But one of them was, number one, was to maintain the current setback of Falcon Hall off of Takoma Avenue. So that's what these two red dimensions are. Falcon Hall is essentially 110 feet off of Takoma Avenue. So that was sort of a building limit line that was established for us from the beginning. Maintain the park-like setting at the corner of Takoma and Fenton. Again, this is sort of a sacred ground that we were not permitted to do any major construction or alteration in that area. Number three was minimize the windows along Takoma Avenue, so any of the building sort of modeling and fenestration, the way we call it, or the openings within the building would have to be limited as viewed from Takoma Avenue. And ensure that the height is no more than 2 stories on Takoma Avenue. So one of the ways that we originally conceptualized that was this additional 70 feet beyond the original 110 feet of this Falcon Hall setback. This area would be a zone that would be limited in height to 2 stories. Before we even got started with design, we were sort of overlaying that limitation. And number 5 was to take advantage of the topography to minimize the perceived height. So just to refresh everybody's memory here, Fenton Street is approximately 10 feet higher than the center of the campus. So that allows for a building configuration to be nestled sort of below grade with a walk-in entry from the campus side that would be 10 feet lower than Fenton Street, effectively allowing that first story of the building to be not visible from the public side of Fenton Street. And then locate the height and rooftop equipment away from Takoma Avenue. One of the aspects of the program is that we do have labs within the facility, and that there will be a lot of mechanical equipment. So the preference was to locate as much of that as possible in the northwest quadrant off of Fenton Street. And maximize the building width and lower the height. That was one opportunity to basically take this full envelope that we have highlighted in blue and try to develop it as much as possible horizontally to minimize the sort of height of the building as would be perceived within the neighborhood, and try to minimize the contrast there as much as possible. Okay, and then to reiterate some of the initial expectations for this building, we are building a modern math and science facility, which is much different than some of the buildings that you all may be familiar with from decades past. We're no longer building didactic lecturing classrooms. The activities that are going to happen in this building are going to be much more active, a lot more hands-on learning. The environments are completely different, so it requires a different type of architecture to enable those kinds of environments to work effectively. And ultimately, it results in a much higher success rate for the students. So ultimately, everything that we're doing is really built around a higher return on the investment that is being made in the students and better preparing them for their job aspirations after leaving college. And we haven't forgotten about our sustainability goals. We are committed to being LEED Silver for this project, and we continue to work with sustainability in mind as we develop the design. None of this is sort of leaving our thinking process, and there will be more discussions on this as we move forward in the process. So as I said earlier, there was a pretty significant reduction in the building area. We were able to achieve that essentially by making the building more efficient. We have still maintained a significant amount of the program that has not changed. You'll see a couple of things that are very noticeable that have changed when you see the exterior of the design. But essentially, we've kept all the basic components that were in the building originally. Many of them have been just slightly reduced. So we've been able to achieve all of the building elements in their current or in their original relationship just at a slightly smaller scale. And that allowed us through the aggregate of so many different pieces to achieve a 30,000 gross square foot reduction. So to remind everybody where the site of the building will be is at the corner of Fenton Street and Takoma Avenue. This site actually sits at a very interesting location, especially architecturally, in that when we look at it, it does have a very prominent face along Fenton Street that is sort of sets a precedent for very large buildings with long facades. And then from the Takoma Avenue side, much smaller buildings like the Commons and the Resource Center, and the neighboring community has a much stronger presence from that face. So this building sits at the juncture of those two different contexts or contextual relationships. And we were aspiring to achieve an architectural design that really synthesized that and assimilated those two different scale differences into the building organization. So back in October, or I'm sorry, about a year ago in July of 2018, we brought to this group three different options. Through the community engagement process and through the dialogue we had with you all, those options evolved through a course of several meetings where we eventually resolved back in October of last year around one scheme. And that scheme was the one that was presented to the Montgomery County Board for the mandatory referral process. And this is the scheme here, the way it was back in October. And now what we're going to do is we're going to go through a series of slides that show that scheme and compare it to a new design that, again, is significantly smaller than what was shown previously. So I'll click here, and you can see there is a change. I'll click back and forth a few times so you can see it, and then I'll explain what you're seeing a little differently. Back in the original design, we had a significant architectural element, which was the planetarium that was situated very prominently off of Takoma Avenue, and we had a lot of discussion. There was a lot of debate back and forth whether that was a positive move or not, but I think generally we got favorable feedback, and that was the scheme we went forward with. The planetarium in the current iteration is not gone, but it has been reduced in size slightly, again, more efficient, but it has been internalized within the building. So it's no longer an architectural element that's expressed on the outside. So you can see it here, it's not there. The other thing that you'll notice is that what was essentially a 3-story building facade internal to the campus along the New York Avenue facade has been changed to a 2-story facade, essentially 1.5 stories on the northern tip, 2 stories on the southern end, and it has been distributed slightly differently and organized differently along its relationship to the center part of campus and Takoma Avenue. The one element that you do see projecting out is the greenhouse, and we will have some renderings that show essentially how that looks architecturally from the street view. But you can see what was the original setback of the two-story area within the building, or for the building setback from Falcon Hall. This is the existing Falcon Hall setback. This was the two-story limitation. We are barely encroaching on that two-story area with what is essentially a very transparent, kind of ephemeral-looking greenhouse that has a very minimalized architectural impact on the neighborhood. So again, there a significant reorganization of the portion of the building that faces the campus, and a reduction in the height, and a considerable increase in the setback of the primary building facade off of Takoma Avenue. And then I'll click back and forth a few times. If you focus on the bar of labs, or the lab block as we sometimes refer to it, along Fenton Street. Oops, sorry, went too far ahead there. So here it is now versus where it was. I'm sorry, there you go. So what you'll notice has changed is that the building perceived height is a little bit lower. We've reduced the parapets, which are the top of the roof line, which is a sort of a architectural wall that helps mitigate the roof transition. So that's this perimeter edge here has been reduced slightly, and there's been a slight reduction in the screen wall around the perimeter of all the mechanical equipment. And there's also been generally a reduction in the building mass from all directions. So each one of the program elements, as I mentioned before, has been reduced a little bit. That includes the labs. We'll show you a plan in a minute that shows you how many labs there are, but each one of them just got a little bit smaller, which meant that the building got smaller from almost every direction, and is sitting a little more centrally on the original building footprint than it was before. So now we'll go through some of the planning, internal planning that helps explain the internal organization. Again, the setback from Takoma Avenue, originally Falcon Hall 110 feet, another 70 feet for the two-story setback. So that greenhouse element is sitting back from Takoma Avenue 160 feet. The primary facade that you would see from Takoma Avenue is actually back 203 feet, so well beyond the Falcon Hall and even that two-story setback we originally were given in the primary directives. And then a setback off of Fenton Street is now 75 feet, so the setback there has been increased slightly as well. And then the setback from New York Avenue has been increased to 240. It originally was on this dashed line here where the blue area is, so it's an additional around 10 feet setback from New York Avenue. And then as we layer up through the building, this is one story higher. The primary entry on the primary floor is still from the north, from the central part of campus, and then there's still an entry off of Fenton Street, centered to the lab block here. Loading is essentially the same. Here you're beginning to see some of the architectural organization of the greenhouse that would be the primary element that would be viewed first from Takoma Avenue. And you can start to see that planetarium, which has now been internalized within the building in a slightly smaller scale, but still meeting the original program intent for the project. One of the things I'll also point out is that the setback area, the area in orange or reddish orange here, will be utilized for both parking and to provide stormwater management and sort of an intense landscaping buffer from Takoma Avenue to really allow the building to recede as much as possible from the public face and become screened from the neighborhood, internalized on the campus. It's also important to point out that that greenhouse, it is all glass or translucent or transparent glass around it to operate effectively as a greenhouse. But there will be an automatic shading system that will be incorporated into that will minimize any kind of light trespass that may potentially affect the neighbors after sunset. So that will not be a glowing box at nighttime. It'll be heavily shielded in the evening hours. Anything else? I think we got else here. Oh, and the primary organization of the labs along Fenton Street and then the Learning Center facing the center of campus is unchanged, but in a slightly reconfigured format. And then adding up one additional level, we have a third level of labs along Fenton Street, but then this is just a roof area on the campus side as we move up in the building. And then the rooftop equipment, as I mentioned before, the screen walls are slightly lower, the parapets are slightly lower, and we have a little better understanding of the mechanical organization of the equipment that will be on the roof. We talked a lot before about materials. One of the things that became a very salient part of our discussion with Bart Mallow was like, what is the current budget environment and opportunities for purchasing materials for a building of this scale? One of the things that became readily apparent was that this is going to be a brick building. Based on the current economy and the current budget, the brick seems to be the most optimal choice from a durability point of view and also from a contextual relationship point of view. Much of the campus that's currently, the buildings that are currently there are brick or have a version of a brick or a masonry module or a concrete module that we think we can assimilate with very well with a brick palette of a neutral tone with a neutral tone brick or a neutral tone mortar. What you see in the lower left-hand corner is a sampling of different ranges of bricks. We aren't committed to one brick yet, but we're committed to like a tonal coloration right now. But here's the same 3 sets of bricks set in front of a variety of different campus buildings, showing the difference in relationship there. One of the things that's really important to point out is that it really depends upon the quality of the light and the angle in which the photographs are taken that will really change the perception of a material like this. So one of the things that will be really important as we move ahead with Bart Mallow is to get a real physical mock-up of these brick elements and materials constructed on the site outside, where you can see it in daylight and really appreciate its relationship to not only the main campus, but also the surrounding community and the neighborhood. So that's something that is on the agenda for later during the process and as we get closer to construction. But other elements you'll see are very similar to what we were talking about in the past, is sort of a punched window and curtain wall relationship with the brick facade and some spandrel glass or opaque glass that will help frame out some of the major building masses. And again, one of the things we're really going to rely on a lot is the landscaping, a really lush sort of residential scale landscaping that will help knit this building with the surrounding community. And some of the renderings you'll see in a minute or two will help to convey the expectations from the landscaping point of view. So one of the tools that we thought was very successful in the past, we're going to use again tonight, is this sort of side-by-side comparison of the original design and the current approach or current design, and then give you a couple of reference points that you can use to help compare the two. So we'll start with the primary corner that is at the intersection of Takoma and Fenton Street. And here, this is just a rendering showing that it is very lushly landscaped right now, a lot of deciduous and evergreen trees. You can't really see the building facade much at all, but just for this exercise, we've made all the landscaping transparent so you can really see what the building would look like if all that landscaping and tree line was removed. So this is the design as it existed back in October. You can see the different elements of the lab block, the planetarium, and the student commons as the one-story element. And then here's the current design, the way we're currently recommending it. The red dashed line that you see around the perimeter is the same red dashed line from the scheme back in October. So you can make some one-to-one comparisons with the reduction in size of this building as compared to what you saw back in October. So some of the things that we'll point out is that that planetarium is no longer there. The primary building facade that you saw very close to Takoma Avenue in the last iteration has been pushed back significantly. And the one element, again, that is still out there is this greenhouse, which has a very diminutive nature. It is one story. It sits very low on the horizon or low into the site, so it won't have much of a presence within the community. The labs, as they face Fenton, as I said, they all got incrementally smaller, so you'll see some incremental reductions around this mass of the building, including height and setback from Fenton, and there's internal setbacks from the campus as well that aren't as easy to perceive from this vantage point. And then looking back, if we put all the trees back in, what would you see with this current design? And trying to point out that some of those materials that we've talked about, this buff-colored brick, the curtain wall and the punched windows, spandrel glass and metal, elements of that will poke out, and you will see aspects of it from this vantage point, but hopefully not a lot. In the lower right-hand corner, you'll see a current picture of what that corner looks like. So it is pretty dense. There are a few transparent moments, but for the most part, during the spring and summer months, you won't see much of the building. You will see a little bit of it during the winter. So using that same approach, we're going to look at a couple other views of the building as we move around the site. So here we're moving further west, what we're calling Lower Fenton. And again, the original design from back in October with all of the trees removed for this exercise, and the red line as a reference to where the building elements were at that point back in October, and then the current design. So you'll see again, the building was set back some here, the parapet height has been reduced, the penthouse height has been reduced, the massing of the building is inset slightly from the original design back in October, and you can't really see much of it here, but the changes along the primary Takoma Avenue view have been set back significantly. And then with the trees applied again, and you can see a few of those building elements poking through, the same palette that we're recommending here. Landscaping is a big part of this vantage point and the current view. So the building would essentially appear between these trees here, and that would be essentially what you would perceive as the majority of the building from that vantage point. And then moving further north on Fenton, the design from back in October, the current design. So again, a significant reduction in building height. The building got smaller from north to south, so this wall was pulled back. The wall along Fenton was pulled off the Fenton Avenue a little bit, and the parapet height was reduced for the lab block, and the mechanical screen wall was brought down slightly. With the trees, and again, the current photograph in the corner, so there's a pretty good dense group of trees at this corner that will be maintained, and the material palette, as you would see it, as poking out around those existing trees, and some supplemental landscaping that will be added. And then further up Fenton, the original design from back in October, and the design the way it stands today. Again, the significant reduction in building height as viewed from Fenton is the primary takeaway from this vantage point. Okay, and then moving around to Takoma Avenue. So I mentioned that earlier, so it was the parapets. The building floor to floor, yeah, the floor to floor height has not changed. No, it's exactly the same. So the floor to floor heights, which is a metric that we use all the time in architecture to sort of give dimension to our buildings, has not changed. So what we're talking about is essentially the architectural transition from the exterior wall to the roof has been reduced, but the effective interior space has not changed at all. And the other thing that I was pointing out is that the mechanical screen wall has been brought down, and that is essentially because we have a much better idea how tall the equipment is that's behind it and how much. Yes, correct. Yep. Yeah, so since everything is pushed back a little bit, it'll have a lower perceived height from any public area around it. Yeah, exactly. Simple geometry. Okay, so Takoma Avenue. So again, the design we had back in October with the planetarium providing a major architectural feature in the stone wall that was part of the student commons with the lab block beyond, and then the current design. And from this vantage point, you're really not perceiving the reduction from the lab block just because of the perspective angle that this view is taken from, but you do see a significant reduction in the setback of this primary facade and then the greenhouse. I'll go back one. So this was the three-story element originally that was set back. Well, you can't really see it here, but it was essentially much closer than, or further back, but much taller. And now it's much lower, but a little bit more in the foreground there, but this primary wall is back at 203 feet. And then with the current landscaping, which is essentially this tree and a few other trees, and the idea that we are going to landscape the area in front of this as much as possible with a stormwater retention system that will help mitigate stormwater effects of this project and the campus, and also help soften the relationship of this building to the surrounding community. And then as we move further east along Takoma, we'll take a look at the building as viewed from East Takoma. So again, the current view with the trees screened out for the benefit of this exercise, and you can just see a bit of the building poking out. This one's really difficult to see a difference. I'll click through it a couple times, but as you move further away, the building height, the couple feet we're talking about, isn't really perceptible. So the mechanical screen wall is essentially looks about the same from that vantage point. And then from New York Avenue, again, the existing trees removed. Here's where the building was significantly taller. It was 39 feet. We were aligning with the resource center immediately adjacent to it. And then the current design, which the building face that projects closest to New York Avenue is 23 feet versus the 39 feet of the resource center. And you can see the incremental adjustments of the building as compared to the red line beyond. And you can see the significant reduction here of the building element that was pulled back from Takoma Avenue. And again, with the trees and the materials that will appear through the transparency of the trees. So in summary, the scheme itself is considerably smaller, like we said, 30,000 square feet smaller, and it has been set back from just about every dimension from the surrounding community and within the campus to accommodate that 30,000 square foot reduction. So again, just to reiterate, the 160 feet is the closest point from Takoma, but that is really just the corner of a greenhouse. The primary building facade is 203 feet from Takoma Avenue, so it's significantly further set back than the existing Commons building. Off of Fenton Street, we're talking about 75 feet setback from the right-of-way on Fenton, which is an additional 5 feet or so more than what it was before. And then we're 240 feet off of New York Avenue, which is approximately somewhere between 5 and 10 feet more than what it was before. So the setbacks have all increased around the entire building. We have maintained the green space, so we're still not touching the green space at the corner of Fenton and Takoma Avenue. We have not encroached, with the exception of that little corner on that two-story limitation, construction limitation that we were originally given in the primary directives. In the lower level space along Fenton is being taken advantage of by the building organization, so the lab block does recede into the site one story to minimize the building height from Fenton. And we consolidated the labs along Fenton, so all the mechanical equipment is organized as much as possible to the northwest quadrant of the building to minimize the impact of noise and any other disturbance from the neighborhoods that would be further to the south and to the east. The Learning Commons is organized off the center of the campus to avoid any spill-out activity impacting the neighbors, so any sort of activity that would come and go from student access would have plenty of opportunities to have green space immediately to the east of the building, the north and east of the building. We've, as I mentioned, significantly reduced the building size and the building footprint to minimize its impact, not only within the community, but just to optimize the operational issues with the budget, and reducing the building massing as perceived within neighborhoods. Just a little repetitive there. So that's it in summary for the design. So I think now we're ready to get some feedback. Yeah?
What is the total square footage of the building now?
It's 105 square feet, 105,000 square feet.
And how much money was it?
It's $30 million reduction. So, and again, it's kind of a, I mean, if you ask any contractor out there right now, if they're going to commit to what is the construction value of a project 2 years from now, it's really hard with the tariffs and all the sort of speculation that's going on right now, the oil issues that are going on in the Middle East. There's a lot of anxiety about that, so it's really hard to really pin that down. So some of that's being driven into the process we're working with. So this is the effect.
Great, thank you, Bob. That was a lot. We have boards that break this down in a lot more clarity, and so we're going to break up into smaller groups so you can get one-on-one with an architect and really understand this in a lot greater detail. So I'm going to bring up my colleague Molly, who's going to break us into some groups. We're going to spend about 20 minutes or so in the smaller groups. There's no magic to that number. If we need longer, we can take it. We're going to spend some time really engaging, then we'll come back and report out. Molly?
Great. So if you got a group 1, you're going to stay here in the auditorium, and we'll pull out the boards down. And then group 2, you're going to be in the lobby, kind of outside that the art gallery. And then group 3, that's students and faculty. If you want to go in the art gallery, then we'll all come back together at the end.
Do we have everybody back? I see group 1, group 2, group 3. You want to bring your notes up here and we'll get started? Excellent. It sounds like we had good discussions. I was in group 2, and I know we had a very robust discussion, so it looks like from the notes here, everyone had the same. So what we're going to do here is we're going to report out so everyone knows what was discussed in each group. We're going to try and keep these reports to a couple minutes so that we can get out of here in a decent time, but we certainly want to hear what each group discussed, and then we'll go over the timeline going forward, and we'll break up. So group 1, who is reporting out for group 1?
Hey there, folks. My name is Josh, humbly representing Group 1. I work at Link with Michael and Molly and a few other members of the team. Thanks for being here tonight. So, Group 1, really great questions, thoughtful contributions, good feedback. I'll run through it really quickly. We had a question about materials reuse and got some information from the college that there's currently some study being done around what materials from Falcon Hall and Science South could be repurposed and salvaged for future use, and some of that's underway, which is really exciting. We'll know more soon. And then there was recently, unfortunately, a fire in a laboratory at UMD. I think it was related to an experiment, but Bob mentioned that there's a lot of standards and a lot of codes that we're using to guide our design, and so safety will absolutely be a very high priority for the project. Let's see, we talked about the facade changes along Fenton, and Bob let us know that a lot of those changes are being driven by budget, and it's kind of, there's a change in the type of shading material and approach to shading that's being used, and that is sort of changing the articulation of that particular facade, but we're sort of retaining window design to be optimal for lab use. Let's see. We had a really good conversation about stormwater management. It's a challenge for the site, and so one of the approaches being used is these stormwater drainage basins or rain gardens, catchment basins. And the idea is to basically capture and infiltrate as much stormwater on site as possible. So there'll probably be a net gain from where we are now, which is good because we need that kind of mechanism on campus and in the neighborhood. We also talked about the tree preservation plan. So there is a tree preservation plan that has been developed. It's currently being reviewed, and that's great progress. And we'll have more once that plan is approved. But we hear those concerns. We've gotten really good comments and questions about tree preservation, so we've made it a priority. Let's see. We had questions about the impacts of the reduction of square footage of the overall building and what that's meant, what the implications are. So basically, it's meant a reduction in pretty much all of the elements within the building. So there's been a reduction in classroom size, but that's sort of the sort of reduction is felt throughout the program. So just kind of minor changes throughout, so that there isn't any major sacrifices in one area. Let's see. We had a conversation about the planetarium. What's great is we're still meeting the expectations for planetarium programming and square footage. We've had a good dialogue with faculty at the college about that. And the last thing I'll mention is about construction and demolition process. So the timeline is still being developed on that process, and there'll be much more to come. There was the sort of consideration being given to existing work being done in the neighborhood. So there's a lot of presence of construction due to WSSC work and PEPCO work. So Barton Mall has already reached out to coordinate with those entities, which is really proactive. And then there was a request to make sure there's proactive communication around any street closures or other major work that would affect the neighborhood. I think that's it. Group, thumbs up. Thumbs side. Yeah, okay, thumbs up. Good.
Good job, Josh. Group 2. Sounds like there was a lot of similarities, which is great.
Indeed. I haven't been in front of an audience in a college since 1985 when I left academia.
quite a while ago. There were quite a few overlaps between our group and Group 1, especially things about stormwater and about trees. These are a lot of concerns and things that the neighbors are talking about a lot. In general, the neighborhood is pretty pleased with this change in design. You know, we thought that given the constraints that were thrown at you, you did a grand job of doing everything, preserving the original philosophy of having something that's compatible with the neighborhood. Just a couple of things here. We talked about, I told you I can't read this stuff. There would be no changes in the parking configuration over there. We haven't gotten, or the college hasn't gotten the results from the geotechnical work yet, the additional geotechnical work that has been done. So we're all looking forward to seeing that, like we did see the original geotechnical studies. A lot of that had to do with the stormwater, and we also talked about stormwater and the groundwater that's going to be generated as construction water, and also for dewatering to relieve pressure along the foundations once the building is built. We know that was recommended in the original geotech report. The planetarium, is that? No, that's preservation of the tree canopy. Amazing what you've done. That can be, yeah. We talked about different methods of screening for lighting on different sides of the building. People thought it was much more site appropriate, fit better. You don't have to go back before the planning board. Someone asked how the 30 grand reduction fit in with the students' learning abilities, and it was explained to us how there was no sacrifice in academic use of the building while maintaining the cost. One person asked about the cost of tearing down the old site, which I imagine is the old Falcon Hall, and that was going to be provided later. Talked about screening of sound, and last but not least, talked about building flexibility into the labs, given trends and changes in science pedagogy. Okay, anything I didn't do or said wrong? No, I thank my producer and my director and
Well done. Didn't mean to make people kneel down here. And group number 3, who's reporting for group number 3? Oh, you've been drafted, Antoine. Group number 3. I like it.
All right, good evening, everyone. My name is Antoine Battle. I'm a Montgomery College alum. Did my classes on the Takoma Park, Silver Spring campus, and Dr. Harold Williams, so my former astronomy professor. I will be reporting out for Group 3. I think there were a lot of intelligent questions from the group. As someone who's new to this process, I think I've learned a lot as well. One of the important things I've learned that we have to keep in mind is that the main strategy behind the construction is to preserve as many of the teaching labs as possible. The classrooms were sort of general classrooms. These will actually be classrooms that are updated with a lot more modern technology and equipment. I remember having a class, actually a math class, and we didn't have any computers in there. So I can see that there have been some updates. Also, Dr. Brad Stewart made a good point when he said that there's a number. There's a number. I believe it is net allowable. Net assignable square feet. Net assignable square feet. Someone threw out a question and a response, and I think there were two numbers: gross square feet, and then the other number was net assignable square feet. So that is a very important number. Or metric. I'm not too familiar with that. I would defer to Dr. Brad Stewart if you can just give the audience a brief description of that number.
So while the gross square feet of the building, actual size of the building, is being reduced by 30,000 plus square feet, net assignable square feet, how the space in the building is actually utilized, is only being reduced approximately 8,000 square feet. So the building got more efficient and a little bit smaller. But the 30,000 square foot reduction makes the room sound deeper than it is.
Right. Clap it up for Dr. Stewart. So we got to rely on the entire group. Might have to call on a few folks. But we also learned that, there are numerous expenses that are contributing to such a high cost. And you can't just jump in, to the project. First of all, you have to demolish the 2 buildings. You have to prepare the sites. And I think we heard that roughly $13 million will go to the mechanical systems, also electrical systems, and the building structure. And so it's not just the construction that is driving the cost. What is the projected, finish date? We heard that it would take roughly about 18 months for the construction project overall, and this should be ready in the fall of 2022. But we don't know if we're going to be able to move in immediately. I believe there's about $7 million allocated for furniture. Furniture, right?
Furniture and equipment.
Furniture and equipment. Okay.
That's just a number right now. It's not hard, fast, or anything like that. Just an estimate.
And also, there's this just to take it back a little bit. There's this process I think we heard about called, if I'm correct, abatement. Abatement, and that involves decommissioning the building. I think I heard abandoning the pool, right? Decommissioning the building, abandoning the pool, and you can only demolish the building in pieces. So you can't just tear the thing down at once. Like, you can only demolish the building in pieces. We also heard, this is a big concern, just with everyone in general, parking. So we also heard that there will probably be some additional parking spaces. And we are missing, actually I want to say we have to move people out of the building, and did we start moving people into different offices already, correct? Right. Okay. Yeah, I think that pretty much summarizes it. I will also add some historical context. We heard that this has actually been in the works, I want to say the master plan since 2005. Okay. Did I miss anything? Okay. All right, so you all are renewing my contract for July 9th, okay?
Thank you so much. That was helpful. Just one point of clarity. I think the parking on the site's staying the same from what we showed before, right? So there's no reduction in parking, from what we understand? No increase. It's reducing from where it is now, but there's no increase. Okay. We've got one more thing to do here, which is just to look at the timeline for going forward. If we could pull that up. We did that. Perfect. So we talked about this earlier, which is kind of how we got here and the fact that we have one more Design Charrette on July 9th. That'll be the end of the Design Charrette process. And then, next slide. And then, one more back. And then we get another diagram. So this is kind of showing everything that happens after we finish the Design Charrette meeting through 2022. Now, in our next meeting with Bart and Mallow, they'll provide a lot more detail on this, but we're showing this basically to show there are multiple stages between now and the building actually being constructed. Every step of the way, you can see that line that says Project Forums. Those are the community meetings where we'll be coming together on a regular basis and providing update, taking feedback, understanding what needs to be remediated, et cetera. So there'll be lots of opportunities all the way through the technical steps of this through completion in 2022. Does that make sense? If it doesn't, that's okay. We'll spend a lot of time in our next meetings over communicating around this, but just to give you an idea of the steps that'll take place between now and 2022. Excellent. Well, thank you all for coming out. Everything will be up on the website. If for whatever reason you get home tonight and you say, I really wish I could relive this entire meeting again, it's been videotaped tonight, and you can watch it on a live streaming availability as much as you'd like. So we'll have everything up online. We'll go from there. Have a great night, guys. Thank you.